right, that's right now.
Your Honor, just as a preliminary matter, Attorney Halverson was here earlier this morning and did have some conversations with the defendant, Mr. Ean, and during those conversations they agreed to submit this video, which if the court would like me to do now, I can enter as a full exhibit.
Okay.
And also, it's my understanding that the defendant has a map that he also wishes to submit, and the state has no objection to that either.
All right, so the first, and what is this a video of, just for the record?
That is a video of the encounter in which I received the citation that we are in court for today.
Okay, here it is. So that will be State's Exhibit 1 and Defendant's Exhibit A by agreement, and the second is Defendant's, let me just change that to Defendant's B, okay, since we're doing the other one. And that is a map, and that is being introduced as a full exhibit as well. All right, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, the state calls Sergeant Michael Kroll to the stand. Sergeant, if you just go to the stand and remain standing, please. Your Honor, will you please swear the witness?
Okay. Do you swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth and the whole truth?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may have a seat.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you please state your name and spell your last name for the record?
My name is Sergeant Michael Pearl. Last name is spelled P-E-A-R-L.
Sergeant Kroll, what is your occupation?
I'm a sergeant with the Concord Police Department.
How long have you been with the Concord Police Department?
It will be 13 years in January.
And how long have you been a sergeant?
Since September of 2008.
Is this your first job in law enforcement?
Yes.
Sergeant, I'd like to direct your attention to June 19th, 2011, around 2:27 a.m. Were you on duty on that morning?
I was.
What were your responsibilities on that date and time?
I was assigned to the patrol division as a patrol division supervisor.
Did you come into contact with somebody by the name of Ian Garret on that evening or morning?
I did.
Do you see Mr. Garret in the courtroom today? Can you please identify him and describe an article of clothing that he's wearing?
You see the defense table with a document blazer.
Your Honor, would the record please reflect that the witness has identified the defendant?
Yes, just so the record's clear, it's Garret Ean.
I apologize, yes, Garret Ean. So, Sergeant, can you describe for the court how you came into contact with Garret Ean?
I was traveling on White Street by White Park, and I saw 3 bicyclists coming down Beacon Street, being in an easterly direction. And as they were traveling down Beacon, I came to the end of Whitewood, the intersection of that, and I saw the 3 bicyclists, and they turned from Beacon onto Rumford Street southbound.
When you saw the bicyclists turning onto Rumford Street, did you actually see them bicycling at this time?
I saw them from White Street.
Okay.
I saw the 3 bicyclists go by on Beacon.
Okay, and were they riding bicycles?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Can you please describe for the court, at that time of night, or that early in the morning, what it's like outside?
It's dark.
It's dark out. Okay, and do you remember the weather on that particular evening by any chance?
I think it was like rain, misted.
Okay, thank you. So did you have contact with Mr. Ean?
I did.
And can you please describe for the court how you actually came into contact with him?
As I came around the intersection of Beacon and Rumford, one of the bicyclists was actually down, almost like he had fallen off his bike or something. I wasn't sure. As I got closer, it looked like the chain was off the bike, and that's when I encountered him.
Did you have an opportunity to speak with him at that point?
I did.
And what were those conversations?
I asked him if he had a headlight for his bicycle, and he said he wouldn't answer my question. Then I asked about ID, and he said he didn't have one on him.
Did you actually see a headlight on his bicycle?
There was no headlight on the bicycle.
So based on that, what did you do?
I issued him a motor vehicle summons.
After you issued the motor vehicle summons, what happened?
I left.
And did Mr. Ean leave as well?
I released him.
Okay, thank you. Your Honor, would the record please reflect that Rumford and Beacon Street are both ways in the city of Concord? Thank you, Your Honor. The state has no further questions at this time. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Ean, this is your opportunity to cross-examine this witness, and just to be clear, it's not the time for you to testify on your own behalf. If you wish to do that, you certainly will have that opportunity. But right now, it's your opportunity to cross-examine this witness.
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, Mr. Pearl, you said you've been a sergeant with the Concord Police Department since 2008? And what length of time have you been the midnight shift supervisor?
Probably early 2009. I had a 6-month tour of evening shift supervisor and then went to midnight.
What do your duties entail?
I oversee the shift.
So the other officers report to you?
Yes.
You began your testimony today, and it's consistent with your written report of notes from after the event, that you were traveling on White Street when you observed bicyclists, correct?
Yeah.
Do you recall how soon after the event it was that you wrote your notes on the incident?
I don't.
May have been a few days.
No, not usually. It's not that long of a time frame.
Do you consider your written testimony to be an accurate record of events?
Sure.
Do you consider your written testimony to be a complete record of events?
Your Honor, I'm just going to object to the use of the word testimony as to the written version. I believe he's referring to the officer's report in this case. And his testimony would be the oral testimony that he just gave under oath to this court.
Just to differentiate, the police report has not been introduced into evidence or the notes that you're referring to.
Okay.
So what he has stated, what the Sergeant Earl has said, orally is the testimony. If there's something that you're trying to impeach or something, what you would need to do is first say you wrote this report, ask him if he needs to refresh his recollection. I'm not sure that's where you're going, but that would be the steps you would need if that's what you're trying to do.
Okay. Excuse me, I'll restate. Would you consider your testimony today to be a complete record of the events of that evening?
A complete record? No. The notes on the back of my summons are just exactly what they are, notes to refresh my memory.
Do you remember if there's anything that you may have written in your notes that... Actually, excuse that, I won't ask about the notes. Mr. Pearl, you're familiar with the form that one officer would write their notes on after they do review an incident and make a record of it. So on the notes that were written, it says that you are to document, and it lists 5 instances, any specific action of violator which increased the hazard of the violation. Do you recall if there was any specific action of the violator which increased the hazard of the violation?
I don't know what that form is that you're talking about.
What you would do is ask permission to approach the witness, and then you can show.
Okay, permission to show this form to witness.
Have you seen what that is?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, you may.
The back of the summons. Yep.
Mm-hmm. You'll note that there are 5 points that it says to address in the notes. What do you feel from the criteria might be each of those points? And you can start with number 1 instead of the question asking. Any action of the violator.
Well, number 1 is dark out, and you should have it done by law as required by the statute. Where the violation was observed and where the contact was made, there's traffic flow there. Total distance travel during pursuit, it was really not applicable. Statements by the violator and his general attitude, I wrote down what the conversation was. And number 5, place of employment, I didn't feel that applicable at that time.
Okay. So you will note in your written testimony that I was audio recording, correct? Excuse me, written testimony. You will note in your notes from the incident that you recalled that I was recording, correct?
You said that. Yeah, you said that.
Okay. So just to clarify, do you feel that there were any, actually, scratch that, never mind. Now, as you noted, the total distance traveled during pursuit did not apply in this instance.
Yeah, pursuit, I wasn't chasing after anybody, so I wouldn't use that word pursuit.
So, I was never detained. You allege that while I was bicycling, I was never detained.
I didn't say that.
Okay. Your citation states that the stop occurred around 2:30 a.m. Do you recall seeing any foot or vehicular traffic at that time?
At that particular time, I don't remember.
Is there usually foot vehicular traffic around 2:30 a.m.?
It's definitely vehicle traffic.
But you don't recall any from that evening?
I don't recall.
Okay. So, traffic conditions may be an example of a specific action which increased the hazard of the violation. If there's heavy traffic, of course, it's dangerous to be on the roads without a light, but if there's less traffic, it changes the hazard of the conditions. Would you agree?
I think it depends on the situation.
Mm-hmm. But you didn't note any traffic. Do you recall what you were doing that morning prior to this encounter?
The beginning of my shift.
Your shift began around 2:30?
No, about 11.
Okay, were you doing anything prior to encountering the bicyclists at the place that you allege?
We were driving around.
Okay, so you testified that you were driving at that time when you encountered bicyclists?
Yes. I saw the bicycles while I was driving.
You testified today that, and you just testified now, that you were traveling on White Street when you observed 3 bicyclists turn from Beacon onto Rumford. May I have the defense exhibit? Thank you. Officer Pearl, you would agree that Rumford Street is parallel to White Street?
You may want to approach the witness again.
Permission to approach?
That's that question again,
So you would agree that Rumford Street is parallel to White Street, correct?
No.
Okay, and you said that you were traveling at the time that you were traveling on White Street at the time that you saw bicyclists turn right from Beacon onto Rumford.
Correct.
So you were at the very end of the street, because where else from White Street could you observe a turn from Beacon onto the road?
Correct.
So you testified that you were at the end of the street when you were with the bicyclists.
I was on the White Street.
Okay. Officer Crowley, are you familiar with the parking lot in White's Park?
The parking lot in White Park? Sure.
Excuse me, White Park. You will see the distance from the parking lot to Beacon Street.
What distance am I looking at?
I was wondering if you, I'm going to phrase that. Could you note the distance from the parking lot on White Street to Beacon Street?
No.
Well, if you'll notice there's a little scale down here. there's 100 meters as opposed to 100 meters being over 300 feet. And where's the distance between the parking lot and Beacon Street? But you testified that you were driving on White Street. So, go on to the next question. Oh. For what reason did you decide to follow the bicyclists?
I'm sorry?
For what reason did you decide to follow the bicyclists?
I noticed one bicycle that bike.
Okay. And this was while you were traveling perpendicular to the travel of the bicyclists?
I was on White Street and the bicyclist came from my left on Beacon, which would be a western direction. Straight that easterly direction.
Are you familiar with RSA 26686?
That's the one I utilized the summons for the bike to my check.
And what is the classification of that RSA? Is it a violation, or is it a crime, a motor vehicle infraction?
As far as I know, it's a motor vehicle road.
But a bicycle is not a motor vehicle, correct?
I guess by statute it's fine.
A motor vehicle without a motor?
I don't know what your question is.
I'll move on. Are you familiar with the fact that the RSA mandates that a red reflector be on the rear of the vehicle, visible from a distance of 300 feet, when exposed to the upper beams of headlamps from a motor vehicle within that distance?
If you're reading that from the RSA, then I'll agree with you, but...
Yes, I am.
Okay.
All right, so did you notice anything wrong with the, So you approached the bicyclist from the rear and you didn't notice anything wrong with the rear red reflector that you allege. You haven't testified to anything defective with that today, correct? Okay. And you were either perpendicular or to the rear of the bicyclist for the entirety of the time that you testified they were bicycling?
When I saw them, or when I came upon the three?
In either case. In each case.
In each case? The bicyclist would have been to my left, going right. Then it would have been behind them. And then I would have just kind of been next to you once the stop was effective.
Okay. So, by your testimony, you were pretty close to the end of White Street for the entirety of your witnessing of the bicycling.
I don't think I understand the question.
Well, you said you were traveling on White Street. You must have been pretty close to the end of White Street if you can see down Beacon Street.
Yes.
Okay, so you're traveling slow, traveling fast?
I'm not sure what my speed was.
When you came upon the scene, you said that an individual was on the ground?
I don't know if he was actually on the ground, or was kneeling, or what the position was. But there was obviously a problem with the bicycle, like he had fallen. That was my initial observation.
Okay, so when you arrived around the corner on Rumford Street, you had observed that somebody was already on the ground and maybe getting back up?
Yes.
But that his bike was disabled and the chain may have been snapped?
I don't know if it was snapped, but I do think I remember the chain was off. The sprocket, I think he was recalibrating, getting that chain back on.
Okay, and nobody was riding their bikes at the time that you arrived on the scene?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. So at no time while I was bicycling you were within 300 feet to the front of my bicycle?
I don't know what the measurements would be. I don't know, but to see you where at the end of White while you're coming down Beacon, I could gauge 300 feet. It's probably well within that.
Okay, and you testified to, or were you in the parking lot of White Park at any time prior to traveling on White Street?
I don't remember. That's what if I pulled out of there or if I was just on White Street. I don't recall.
Okay, so you may have observed the bikes for the first time when you were in the parking lot of White Street. You don't believe that you did?
No, I didn't see them there. I saw the one I was coming to the end of White at Beacon.
So you never used your spotlight to better illustrate where the bicyclists were?
When?
At any point before, while observing the people on the bikes?
I don't remember that. I don't remember if I used it or not.
So you may have used your spotlight while people were on bikes traveling on Beacon Street?
I don't recall that.
Do you remember where I was standing relative to the person on the ground when you arrived on the scene?
I don't.
When you arrived on the scene, how long was it before you got out of your vehicle?
I don't know.
After you exited your vehicle, did you reposition it at any point over the course of the encounter?
I don't recall if I did or not.
Are you aware that the course of the events were recorded that evening?
You said you recorded.
Are you aware that there are also video recordings of the course of the events?
Am I aware of it? But you said you were, so I'm going to guess that there is.
Okay. So you were aware that I was audio recording, but you didn't realize when I was then holding up a camera and video recording?
I don't know what you would. You had a phone.
Drawing attention to the... Oh wait, the notes weren't submitted. You made a... Excuse me. You remember two other individuals being present that night, correct?
There were 3 total.
Okay, and you said that they left unharmed after you observed that they had proper equipment?
Yeah, I asked them if it was okay, so they had fine.
And you never detained them at any point?
Detain them? Other than just stop and check on, make sure it wasn't injured, get hurt, you needed to accept medical assistance.
Do you consider that a detention?
To render service? No, I don't.
Could you describe the equipment that the other bicyclists had?
No.
Do you remember, you said that they had proper equipment, so what were you checking for?
Lights and reflectors.
Okay. And you allege that nobody had defective rear reflectors, correct?
No, you said that.
Okay, but you don't recall, you don't testify to anybody having defective rear reflectors?
No, I didn't say that.
Okay. Do you allege that I ever had a defective rear red reflector?
No, I didn't mention that.
Okay. So, what did you observe about the lights on the other bicycles? Were they fixed to the bike?
I don't recall.
Were they handheld lights?
I don't recall.
Were they cell phones?
Wasn't focused on the other bikes.
You weren't focused on the other bikes. So, they got less of an inspection as to what light they had than my bike got?
No, I knew the bike didn't have a light, and that was your bike. So that's why I focused on you. You can't watch all three people at the same time.
Did you notice any saddlebags or compartments on any of the bicycles?
I don't recall.
So there may have been a pouch affixed to the handlebars of one of the bicycles?
I said I don't recall.
Okay. And a small pouch could be the right size to fit a bicycle light into, correct?
Are you asking me if there's a light inside the bag that I didn't see?
I'm asking you if a light could potentially be in a bag that you didn't see.
I don't think I understand that question.
So you don't know if there was a bag that may have been big enough to hold a bicycle light?
On your bike?
Or any of the bikes?
Which one is it? Is it your bike or the other bikes?
You can recall each one. Do you recall mine? Do you recall any of them?
I just recall you didn't have a headlamp on it.
Okay, but you don't remember about a saddlebag or any other compartment? How long was it after you exited the vehicle that you became aware that you were being recorded?
After you told me.
Okay.
I don't know that time frame.
Do you remember who engaged who first?
Meaning, I don't know.
Who engaged in conversation first?
I don't know.
Okay, so I may have began the conversation with, I'm audio recording?
You might have.
Have you received any training in dealing with subjects recording you?
Have I received any training? Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, so that's not something that's reviewed in New Hampshire Police Standards and Training?
I don't know. When was the academy? It was 13 years ago.
Do people have a right to record the police?
Sure.
How do you feel about being recorded?
Your Honor, objection. How this officer feels about being recorded is not relevant to whether or not Mr. Ean's bicycle had a headlamp on it, which is why we're here before the court today.
How are you tying that into the relevance of the stop?
I believe that it is relevant because of a prior instance in which I had with Mr. Pearl less than a year prior in which he responded violently to my recording him.
And how is that related to this stop? What is it that you're trying to tie together?
Relating it to this stop is it demonstrates an animus for recording, and especially the testimony he's given so far that he didn't get a good look at the other bikes, he was focused on this bike, shows that he was maybe drawing attention to the audio recording aspect, and that seemed to be why he issued the citation that he did.
I'll allow a few more questions, but it is getting pretty far afield of the charge, which is did you or did you not have the headlight? So I'll allow a few more questions, and then it really is getting far afield.
Thank you, Your Honor. Do you recall myself asking for your name?
I believe so.
Okay. Do you recall how many times I asked for your name?
No.
Did I ask more than once?
I don't recall.
Did I ask more than twice?
I don't remember. How many times you asked me the name?
And you're aware that there is an audio recording of the evening?
You said you were recording, so I suspect there is a recording.
Do you feel that if you heard the audio recording, you may be able to recall how many times I asked your name?
Sure.
Okay. If permission to play for the court the recording from that evening?
This is state's position.
Your Honor, the recording of the evening has been entered as a full exhibit as stated. Yes, Your Honor. I believe so. Is that what you're referring to?
Correct.
Okay. So as far as whether or not Mr. Ean asked Sergeant Pearl his name, however many times. Again, I don't believe that that particular fact is relevant as to whether or not there was a headlamp on the bicycle. But the court does have that as a full exhibit at this time.
All right, so just to be clear, this is the recording of that night?
Yes.
Okay. So I think what would make sense, because I understand you're trying to tie some things together, but again, there is some question of really the relevance of how many times you asked for his name. However, what I'll do is you will have the opportunity to make that argument, kind of as you started now in your closing, as to how it all ties in. And you can call attention to me what you want, and then when I listen to this, I will have my notes of what it is that you want to highlight for me with your argument. Okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I may have asked you what for your name 3 times?
I said I didn't recall.
Okay. Did you ever answer that question?
I guess I told you my name.
But you may not have, correct?
No, it's at the bottom of the summons.
It's at the bottom of the summons. Do you recall saying that night that your name would be on the bottom of the summons?
Probably.
Did any other Concord police officers arrive on the scene while I was detained?
Another unit might have responded, but I'm not sure.
Okay. And that other unit that responded may have been recorded as they arrived as well?
If you recorded it.
Do you recall myself conversing with another officer at the scene?
I'm not sure.
Do you recall interjecting into my conversation with another officer at the scene?
Objection, Your Honor. Again, relevance regarding whether or not there's a headlamp on the bicycle.
This is getting pretty far afield. What would be the relevance of that line of questioning with respect to the charge that you're charged with?
Well, it may be something that the video could illustrate better. The fact that when the other officer arrived on the scene, I asked his name before he was able to give it to me. Mr. Pearl cut him off and said not to give his name.
Right, well, I will make note then what I would be the video.
During your time at Police Standards and Training, were you ever instructed on building positive rapport with members of the community?
Objection, Your Honor. Again, relevance as to whether or not there was a headlamp on the bicycle.
Withdrawn.
Thank you.
Is there a Concord Police Department policy regarding identifying yourself to the public?
Your Honor, again, objection, relevance as to whether or not there was a headlamp on the bicycle.
I will allow this one.
We have name badges to serving incidents. We're required to do that.
Okay, and if a member of the public asks for your name, is it common response to give your name or maybe a card?
It can be, sure.
What instances would you not respond to someone asking your name?
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance as to the headlamp on the bicycle.
I would agree. I think that it is irrelevant to this charge. Your first question about the policy is I think, appropriate. This one now, what he made in other circumstances is not relevant to what he did in your circumstances.
Withdrawn. Why did you not reveal your name that evening?
I didn't know that I did. It was on the summons, correct?
It was on the summons. When you arrived on the scene that night, did you recognize myself from any encounters prior?
No.
So you didn't recall a similar incident on Old Loudon Road from June 29th of 2010?
That you didn't have a headlight on your bike?
Well, in that instance, I wasn't stopped for having a bike. I was stopped for looking too young. But I was also audio recording, and you arrived on the scene third. Do you recall that incident?
Yes, I do.
Do you recall how you responded to my audio recording in that incident?
Objection, Your Honor.
That is irrelevant, again, to the situation of the headlamp. So I'll sustain that objection. Those questions dealing with this other encounter is irrelevant, other than when you did ask, the day of the stop for the bike, did he recognize you from there? That's clear. But as far as what occurred at that prior stop, that's irrelevant.
Sergeant Pearl, are you aware of a complaint filed against yourself on July 9th of 2010?
A complaint filed against me? No.
Do you believe that... Have you ever had a physical reaction to my recording you in the past?
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance.
Again, that is not relevant to the incident that occurred on the date that you were stopped with the bike. So any questions you're getting too far afield, and I am going to sustain the state's objection on those types of questions for this proceeding.
It's unfortunate that that incident never got a day in court. Are you familiar with the Glick decision, sir?
Objection, Your Honor.
The Glick decision is directly relevant to recording the police. Thus, I believe it has relevance in this case.
Again, how is, other than going to the proof of credibility of witnesses as to what actually occurred, how is the general policy about reporting police officers, how is that relevant to just the specifics of your charge of operating without a headlamp?
Withdrawn. How often do you write citations for headlamp violations on bicycles?
Well, not part of the patrol division now, so not frequently anymore.
You're on the night shift, though, correct? Oh, okay. Do you ever issue warnings or decide against citing individuals for such a violation? And what factors do you usually use in deciding whether or not you'll do that?
Time of day, locations, citizens' concerns about areas of problems.
So you stand by your assertion that you were actually withdrawn. No further questions.
Thank you.
No redirect, Your Honor. Thank you.
You may step down.
Your Honor, may Sergeant Pearl please be excused?
No, I'm assuming there's no objection.
Yes, that's fine.
Yes, you may.
Thank you, Sergeant.
Thank you.
Any other witnesses?
Your Honor, the state has no further witnesses and the state rests at this time.
Right, Mr. Ean, at this time, it's your opportunity. If you wish to testify or present witnesses, you have the opportunity to do so. You are not required to. As you know, the state is required to prove this case beyond reasonable doubt, but it's also your right to present witnesses or testify. Do you wish to do either or both?
The defense wishes to call Ian Clement.
All right. Go right ahead.
Anybody want to get Ian?
Right, Mr. Clement, would you come right up here, please? before you sit down, would you please raise your right hand? You swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth and the whole truth? Thank you. Please have a seat. If you would please state your name and spell your name and last name for the record.
I-A-N, Clement, C-L-E-M-E-N.
We're good.
In what town do you currently reside?
Concord.
Were you present in Concord on June 19th, 2011?
I was.
Do you remember what you were doing at about 2:30 that morning?
I was going on a bike ride with a couple friends.
Who was bicycling with you?
You and Garage that one.
So you decided, you and your friends decided you'd be going for a bicycle ride through the neighborhood. What bicycles would you be using?
There were 3 bikes in my garage that we used.
And who do the bikes belong to?
One to me, the other 2 to my family. Not sure.
Do you remember if there was any traffic while you were bicycling?
No.
Do you remember seeing any pedestrians?
No.
Did you encounter any people while you were bicycling?
Yeah.
When do you recall first encountering someone who was not bicycling with you?
We had just left my house, came to White Park. We took a left, going alongside the park, and then I think it was right. I don't know what street that is. It was, we were going towards Concord Street. In the parking lot of the White Park, there was like a light that was shining on us. So it was from a parked car.
Okay, so the only person that you recall out that night, other than yourselves,
other than the police officer that showed up about maybe a minute after that.
Okay, so you recall seeing someone parked at the White Park parking lot,
Yeah.
who shone a light on you as you biked past White Street?
Is that the street that crosses along with the main parking lot of White Park? If you come out of that and take a left, we were right at that intersection. If you took a right to go towards Concord.
Mm-hmm. When you passed by White Street, do you recall a vehicle traveling on that street?
I do not.
What happened next?
So we continued to ride past the park. We took a right on Rumford Street. We continued for maybe like 20 seconds, and then my friend Raj fell off his bike. So we all stopped our bikes to see if he was okay. At that point, we noticed headlights behind us. So we turned around and it was a police car.
Thank you. From which direction did the headlights approach?
Behind.
Okay. What happened next?
The policeman got out of the car, and I assured him that my friend was okay. I assumed the stop was, we were in the road. My friend had fallen off his bike, so we were just kind of leaving the road, making sure he was okay. So I figured that was the reason we were being stopped. So I told the cop, oh, my friend's fine. At which point you told the policeman your audio recording, and I just asked the policeman if I and my other friend could just leave the situation if I was being detained or anything. He said, you're free to go, so I left.
Okay, so at that point, you and Viraj left the scene?
Yeah.
And you weren't able to observe what happened after that?
My friend Viraj was becoming a citizen, I think, the next week, and he wasn't really interested in being around any kind of, I think he was a little intimidated by the situation, so he wanted to leave. So I did not see the rest of the situation. I went right directly back to my house.
Mm-hmm. Do you recall being asked if you possessed a red rear reflector?
No.
Do you recall being asked if you possessed a light?
Yes.
Did your bicycle have a light?
Yes.
Do you know if any of the other bicycles had lights?
All three of the bikes, by my understanding, had lights. However, my bike is the one I was riding, so I can't attest whether or not the other two had lights that were on and functioning. Yes.
Have you ever before witnessed Mr. Pearl act in a manner unbecoming of his office?
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance as to whether or not Mr. Ean's bicycle had a headlamp on it.
What would you argue is the relevance of that line of question?
Mr. Clement was a witness to both this instance and the instance almost a year prior in which Mr. Pearl physically prevented me from recording him.
Right. Again, I will sustain the state's objection. This line of questioning is irrelevant to what occurred with respect to the issue of the headlight. Your questions prior to that were fine about, he asked you about the lights and the rear reflectors. Those are the kinds of questions that are appropriate and I certainly will continue to follow.
Was Mr. Let me rephrase. At any point was the officer in his vehicle with the lights on situated in front of yourself while you were operating the bike?
No.
And do you remember, well, I've already gone over that. I believe I have no further questions.
I have no questions for this witness.
All right, you may step down. Thank you. Are Mr. Ean, any other witnesses?
I have no other witnesses.
Right, do you wish to testify on your own behalf?
I do not wish to testify.
Okay, very good. So you rest at this point. All right. Now you have an opportunity to make a closing argument if you wish to do so. Assuming your opportunity to tie everything together.
Yes, if I could just gather my thoughts briefly. There's a very small dispute in the facts, but it's a very critical dispute between Mr. Pearl's testimony and what he believes may or may not have been his location, and where Mr. Clement testifies to where Mr. Pearl was when he initially saw the bicyclists. If we refer to the map, the parking lot on White Street is far more than 300 feet from Beacon Street. RSA 266-86 specifically states, every bicycle operated on any way during darkness shall be equipped with a lamp emitting a white light visible from a distance of 300 feet in front of the bicycle. At no point was Mr. Pearl in front of the bicycles shining his light or even observing them. He testified that he saw them from the side and approached from the rear. At no point did Mr. Pearl bring up a defective issue with the red reflector, with which the statute goes on to require. A red reflector on the rear of a type approved by the director, which shall be visible from a distance of 300 feet to the rear when directly in front of the lawful upper beams of headlamps on a motor vehicle. Mr. Pearl does not remember whether or not he shone his light from the White Park parking lot. But but that is exactly what he did and why Mr. Clement also remembers where he was situated. If you noticed this was a fact that Mr. Pearl left out of his testimony, because when 3 people are by themselves at night, Mr. Pearl acknowledged there was no traffic, it's very noticeable when somebody shines a very bright light on you. It stands out. So for Mr. Pearl not to include in his written notes or in his testimony today that fact points out that he's disconnecting himself from the beginning of the engagement with the individuals. His encounter began when he shone the light. And at that time, he was at a greater distance than he could have observed via the statute the qualifications for the bicycle's headlamp. Once he arrived on the scene, which he acknowledged from the rear, I was under no obligation to produce a headlamp for him that may have been used for the bicycle while it was operating. During the encounter, if you will refer to the defendant's exhibit, the video and the audio from the encounter, I was recording him and asking his name and badge number, which he 3 times refuses to provide. When another officer arrives on the scene, he then cuts off that officer from giving his name, which I believe demonstrates an animus. He knew who I was when he arrived on the scene. He was aware that I had filed a complaint against him for assaulting me in the past. And this was a very silly, petty way to just inconvenience my life over a bicycle light. Mr. Pearl responded to the recording. If you notice in the recording the amount of time in which he focuses on my 2 friends who actually were engaged in something that, one was injured, something that you think would have caught more of his attention. But very quickly after I say that I'm audio recording, the focus becomes on me and my friends are allowed to leave. It is only after that point that he inquires about the light, and the fact that he's refusing to identify himself, and also I don't know why he refused to allow the other officer to identify himself, it demonstrates a disconnect from the person doing the job and the job that he's doing. So he just said his name would be on the summons. It was very impersonal. I don't believe demonstrates professionalism in line with Concord Police Department's mission statement. And the fact that Mr. Pearl was never in a position qualified to judge the headlamp in question, I believe disqualifies this case from any reason why it should be found guilty of this infraction. And that is my closing argument.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, the issue here today is whether or not Mr. Ean's bicycle had a headlamp on it. And as Mr. Ean was reading the statute to you, 266-86 says, every bicycle operated upon any way during darkness shall be equipped with a lamp emitting a white light visible from a distance of 300 feet in front of the bicycle, and goes on to then discuss the red reflector. So first, the statute requires that the bicycle must be equipped with a lamp, and that lamp must emit a light. Sergeant Pearl testified that Mr. Ean did not have a light on his bicycle. He was riding that bicycle on a way to the city of Concord to, I believe that Sergeant Pearl testified that it was Rumford and Beacon Streets. So Mr. Ean was riding his bicycle on a way in the state of Concord. It was dark and it was raining on that evening, and the bicycle did not have a light on it. So under that statute, 266-86, Mr. Ean should be found guilty of this offense. And regardless of whether or not Mr. Ean feels that Sergeant Pearl acted professionally or did not act professionally, it's not the issue before the court, and therefore Mr. Ean should be found guilty. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to take this under advisement, so I have an opportunity to review the CD, and I will issue an order later. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Please rise.